Well, hey, good morning. Happy Wednesday. Can you believe we are in the first week of December? Hard to believe here. Holidays are in full force. Last week, Thanksgiving, and now full steam ahead into the holidays. I have even got my Buccaneer mug, most importantly, a little Christmas blend coffee this morning, kind of getting me in the spirit of the season. Maybe you're like us. We've spent some time. I should give most of the credit to Denise. She does a great job of decorating our house, takes a lot of care, has a lot of great ideas, switches it up regularly, and so our house looks great. Really helps put you in the mood of this season with the tree up and all of that sort of thing. One of the things that's kind of a feature of the Christmas season, there's just something about Christmas lights. Now, I like white lights. I know there are white lights and there are multi-light people. I'm definitely on the white light end of the spectrum. Like the tree behind me there lit up. I guess you can see that in the one we have here. These white lights are just, there's something about the warmth of them. We have candles, we have the tree lights and some other lights. There's just something so comforting, so soothing, so beautiful about it. Maybe you're like us, and as the kids were younger especially, we'd take trips. B Street was a big deal here in the Keys to see Christmas lights. It's always just kind of a cool thing. There was even a house up north by the high school, or excuse me, by the elementary school, Key Largo School, for a while, that had their lights set to music. And there's just something about Christmas lights. There's just this sense of warmth and comfort and family and the season. And it's great. And it's interesting because Christmas lights are such a big thing. And this time of year, the days, we're moving in just a couple of weeks to the actual day with the least amount of daylight of any day of the calendar, here, December 20th, 21st. And so especially with these longer times of darkness, the lights are very important. There's something about Christmas and lights, and it really goes way back, because one of the kind of quintessential, can I say that word, Christmas prophetic scriptures is found in Isaiah chapter 9. It's that verse that we get to that says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." In verse 6, the government will be on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. This part of the Handel's Messiah comes out of this particular verse. But it's earlier than that, as Isaiah opens this prophecy that he begins in verse 2, before he gets to those maybe more famous words, by saying this: "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned." So you see here, Isaiah is using the contrast between light and darkness. If I'm talking about particularly Christmas lights and the warmth that they bring, the opposite of that, darkness, is, I don't know what words you could use, eeriness of darkness. Some people are a little afraid or scared of the dark, the darkness that limits you. And there's a coldness to darkness. In winter months, as the days get shorter, the sun shines less. Then there's cooler temperatures. Not so much for us in the Keys. I'd love a little cooler temperatures, but we don't get a lot of those this time of year. We kind of are pretty mild all year long, but nonetheless, the difference between light and darkness, between warmth and coolness, we see that contrast. And if you notice what Isaiah says, is he's talking to people who are well acquainted with darkness. In fact, he says they're walking in darkness, or living in the land of shadows and darkness. The walking and the living, that's where they are. When Isaiah writes these words to the people of Israel, he's writing these words to people who are acquainted with darkness more than light. The particular episode of their history as they've turned their back on God in rebellion and idolatry, and his judgment is coming. Part of what Isaiah will prophesy, even in that, Isaiah is saying, listen, even in the worst of times, the light will come. And we see in this contrast, not just between warmth and cold, between light and darkness, but in them, we see images. In darkness, we would say that would be sort of a picture or an image of God's distance of God's, I don't know if we'd say punishment, let's say displeasure. God's distance and displeasure may be in the idea of darkness. On the other hand, light is God's presence, his blessing imaged by light. And this is throughout the scripture. For instance, if we go back to sort of some of the seminal moments in Israel's history, the Exodus, we think about as they're going to be liberated from Egyptian slavery, there's a series of plagues. And one of them in Exodus 10 is the plague of darkness. And it says particularly, we see this contrast between light and darkness. It says the darkness is so dark, Exodus 10:23, that for 3 days the people can't move around because they can't see anything. I mean, we're talking the pitch darkness. For me, it was a time when we were on a trip with some of our teens and we went into a cave, and as part of that they said turn off, we had headlamps to light the way, but as we got into the cave and turned off the headlamps, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Pitch darkness is the image here. But in that same verse it says that where the Egyptians lived there was light, and we see the difference between the helplessness and the coldness and the situation in darkness and the hope, we might say, the life that comes with light. The difference between God's displeasure and God's presence illustrated there. In fact, if we move forward in the story, as Israel is liberated finally from bondage and they make the trek away, we even see this same thing play out where God leads Israel by a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire to light the way in their journey, and at times obscures behind them with clouds and with fog and such that keeps the Egyptians in the darkness while his people can move forward in light. This idea, we see God's presence versus God's absence, God's blessing versus God's displeasure in these two things playing out. And maybe John picks up on, maybe Isaiah here, this promise of a child who will be born, a son who will be given to the people, who will bring light into the darkness, when he says in the opening verses, John chapter 1, his account of the life of Jesus, as he picks up on this theme, and he says in John 1, verse 4, he talks about Jesus is the light of all mankind. The Word that became flesh is the light of all mankind. And in verse 5, he says that light shines in the darkness. Even the birth of Jesus is pictured as a prophetic fulfillment of light that comes into darkness. And Jesus himself picks up that theme. John chapter 8, one of the I am statements of Jesus, 8:12, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus, this Old Testament prophetic theme of Israel to a people that feel separated from God, that feel apart from him, Isaiah says, don't worry, God will send his light. And John, having followed Jesus for his ministry, being one of his disciples, as he writes down his account of how he wants people to think about Jesus, he uses this image of darkness that comes into light. And Jesus himself, I am the light of the world. He whose enemy does not walk in darkness. We see this contrast, and we see in Jesus the light of the world. And so maybe this month, this week, if you've got your lights up, or if you drive around town and see them around, every time you see those Christmas lights that will be here, there, and yonder in your own home and around, maybe we need to remember they're symbolic. There's so much, by the way, of Christmas decorations that are symbolic. That's another story for another day, not today. They're symbolic, I think, and they remind us of the life and the light that is the meaning of Christmas, that is Jesus, who is the light of the world. So let this Christmas season, let those lights remind you and point you to Jesus. We're going to talk about that every time we get together. Sunday mornings, we're going through the 4 Sundays of Advent together, and we're talking about the idea of the expectation that is fulfilled in Jesus, looking at various Old Testament and moving into the New Testament stories of what we might call miraculous births. We looked at Sarah and Abram with the birth of Isaac last Sunday. This Sunday we'll move toward Hannah and Samuel and look at that and move on into to Mary and Elizabeth and those stories later. We see this idea that hope often comes into hopeless situations when life comes. And Jesus is the ultimate picture of hope that comes to hopelessness, of light that comes to darkness. We want you to know him, and we're going to talk about him throughout this Christmas and Advent season. So as always, you're invited to join us Sundays 9 a.m. as we go through our Advent series together, as we've got the church decorated, as we worship God and thank him for the light that has shone into the darkness of our sin-stained hearts, lit by the gift of God and the grace of God made possible through Jesus. Well, I'm sure this time of year you've got a lot on your plate. I know I've got a lot on mine, and so I'm going to leave it with you now. I'm going to leave you to the rest of your week, and certainly hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday, and would love to see you with us maybe on Sunday mornings 9 a.m., and certainly we'll touch base again next Wednesday. So take care, and we'll talk to you soon.